Welcome to PBS Pulse, the Porto Business School podcast that brings experts that talk about trends that are shaping the future of business. So today we have Nicolle Merrill, a legal authority. Welcome, Nicolle, to talk about generative AI and of course, the impacts on organization innovation. Nicolle, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And of course, Nicolle is the CEO of Boring AI and the PBS faculty has so much to tell us. So honored to have you here and welcome to today. And let's think and talk about how leaders make decisions. And for today, I would like to start with a quick question that talks about how current reports, 2024 McKinsey report, it said 79% of business leaders say they are at least piloting something on AI, and yet only a small fraction of them feel confident that they're really understanding how it works. So the first question is, gaining so much attention, generative AI, and when it comes to leadership, how much should they really know about models and the way they support their decision making?
Oh, this is such a great question. So thank you for starting that off, and also thank you for having me. When it comes to building products with generative AI or looking at how to use generative AI inside your organization, it really starts at the individual level. So thinking about how these models work, in particular, these are general purpose tools, which means you can use them for all kinds of interesting things, right? You can generate code, you can analyze data, you can write an email with them, right? And you can do that all in one conversation if you want. But the reality is just because they're good at a lot of things doesn't make them good at everything. And so where leaders need to spend their time is figuring out what does the model do well, and just as importantly, what does it not do well? So for example, I was having a conversation with a group of finance leaders recently, and they told me, we really want to use generative AI for forecasting to improve our forecasts. And I was like, ooh, that's an example of something where generative AI does not do well, right? That's where you want to really invest in your traditional AI, forecasting models, and so on. A better use for generative AI models would be something like getting your financial data and using generative AI to ask questions about your financial data in natural language, right? Because normally we query data with technical code, with SQL and things like that. In this case, we can use natural language to query our data and use generative AI to give us really insightful responses and recommendations. So it requires some nuance, right? And that's hard when we're all being told, we got to use AI, we got to build with AI, right? But taking that time to learn about these models and even get hands-on to figure out what does it do well, what does it not do well, can really help in the decision-making process.
So you mentioned something, or you implied something about being overwhelmed with so many models, so many tools. Mm-hmm. What do you recommend, would you recommend for leaders besides taking their time? Right. To make sense of all these models, all these possibilities?
Yeah. I just want to validate that everybody is going through this, even those of us in the field, right? That you cannot keep up with everything. And so really there's about three ways to kind of deal with this. One, finding the tool that works best for the problem, right? Because not all models are going to work for every single problem. So you can do that in one of two ways. You could do it yourself, but usually as a leader, you don't have that kind of time. So find the people inside of your organization who are experimenting, who have an opinion on this, and then can really help you along. The other thing to do is to have those conversations with your peers. This is something that I find a lot of organizations aren't doing right now. We'll go to conferences, sure, you'll hear a lecture about generative AI, but then you'll come back and then the conversation doesn't really continue. So how can you facilitate conversations inside your organization with peers to start to talk about, wait, what models are we using, right? And then of course you can go to your tech department and say, what do you recommend and why?
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah. That's something that affects all of us, even the ones of us in the field. Now, you mentioned something earlier that brings me to the second question. I think everyone is asking. So we're now using, I think that reports say 60% use already strategic insights from generative AI to make their decision making. Mm-hmm. But a lot of them don't trust the output. Yes. And the question, they still rely on human validation, mm-hmm. maybe fortunately.
Yeah,
I think we all believe that. I think the question that which cases should we blindly accept the results and which ones we should be very cautious?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of ways we can answer this. So I would say let's not blindly accept the results anytime, right? Because the reality is, as good as these models are, they don't know everything. They don't know everything about your business. They don't know everything about your business problems, and they don't know everything about the solution you're looking for. So, for example, if you give the model or a generative AI tool like ChatGPT some information, your output is only going to be as good as the information you gave it, the data you gave it or didn't give it, right? So now we kind of have this problem. You may have a really big decision, but you haven't given enough information to the model to get a quality output. Right? So you still need that human judgment there to say, oh, this is actually not very helpful, right? And you want to use those critical thinking skills. I'd argue that you should think about where you're at in the decision-making process when it comes to using, generative AI for decision-making. So it's really good in the beginning of the process when you're trying to make sense. What's the outcome I'm really looking for? What are some of the challenges that I'm having? Where am I stuck? Asking for frameworks, so like applying certain business frameworks that you know of to this problem, or experimenting with different frameworks, or even gaming it out, right? Ask ChatGPT to provide different scenarios and outcomes to really enhance your understanding of what could happen. Take that information and then use your human expertise, right? The reality is humans, it's so weird to just say humans now, right? The reality is that having someone that you can go to, a colleague, and give you a gut check that may know the ins and outs of the organizations, the politics, the nuances can be very helpful. And we all know that when we go to people to help with decisions, we're building trust. And we're building those relationships inside of our organizations, and those are incredibly valuable. So we don't want to just blindly trust, and we don't want to neglect humans as well, because we need those relationships inside our organizations. So I think of it as it's a tool. I've gotten some information, great. Let me go process that information with people using my expertise and so on.
But in a context that we're having all managers and leaders with the fear of missing out,
yes,
we have to use it.
Yes.
If you had to say 5 things that you should definitely be using and 5 that you should be really cautious, can you share with the people at home?
I'll be cautious on legal, finance, and HR. Those are the areas where the risk is high. So where is the risk at? I think when I teach about generative AI and how to use it, I also teach about the risk, right? So for example, if you have an output that it's just going to be discussed between you and your team about the decision, getting it wrong is not a big deal. But let's say you're presenting to the board, and this is your strategic recommendation. You better make sure that everything is correct. And now we hope that's true, but what's the promise of generative AI? Efficiency, make things go faster, right? So you could see where someone would skip that part where we kind of make sure it's accurate, make sure it's the right direction, and just blindly give a result. So look at the risk. So when should we use it? I think in a low risk situation, if we're on a team, I love the idea of doing, decision making with ChatGPT and bringing it into your team and say, okay, here's some of the results we got. Do we agree with this? Why not, right? Facilitate that discussion because it's interesting. We don't need to blindly trust results, but we can talk about them.
Okay, and area specific. Marketing, we all see image generation, content, definitely are areas where you believe that for that we should definitely be using.
Oh, for using, yeah, you can use it for that, and teams already are. I think marketing is probably the furthest ahead of all the functional functions inside of organizations because they're the ones with the easiest use cases: image generation, copy generation, blog post generation, and so on.
Okay, so let's talk about the hard ones. And we are here at PBS to educate leaders. We teach them and we want them to be explorers, but then we want to make them lead the change. So if we think about how AI and generative AI could help leaders and managers to lead more effectively their teams, do you think generative AI has a role in that?
Yeah, definitely. If I think about, just at the management level, a lot of management tends to be a lot of prioritization. It tends to be synthesizing information and data, reporting, and a lot of interpersonal communication skills, right? So ChatGPT, I just use that as an example, but we can use, Claude, any of them, right? Is really good about prioritization. You can give it a whole bunch of tasks and say, help me figure out what I should do best. And then go further and say, ask me questions to help me reflect on what I want to be doing, right? So that way the machine isn't making the decision, it's querying you to kind of reflect. And that can be really valuable. to leaders who don't have the time, who are feeling overwhelmed. It's a safe space to go. The same with synthesizing information. If you once you've kind of used generative AI and you learn kind of its quirks, being able to give it unstructured data or documents within reason of your data privacy policies in your organization and have it make sense out of it and query it can be a big time saver as well. And then create a report, of course, is probably one of the top use cases. But my favorite one is really the interpersonal communication piece. So it's hard as a manager to know exactly what to do in any awkward situation, right? So being able to say to ChatGPT, hey, I'm not sure how to handle this. Can you give me some advice? Or even better, can you role play this situation with me so I feel more comfortable, right, going through this situation with my colleague or my direct reports and so on. So you have all these different ways that you can experiment with generative AI as a manager and get kind of like that assistance, especially for new managers.
Okay, that's an interesting point that you're making, which is being a confident, a mentor, and using it to interact with you on that role.
Yeah, kind of like a support, because not everyone gets a mentor. Right? We all want a manager, and they're great, but not everyone has all the support, and not everyone feels comfortable asking some of these questions.
And you mentioned earlier that there's this language barrier as well. The models are trained with more on specific data. Can we apply that what we just said? There are any limitations regarding language barriers? How do you see that within the different nationalities, different languages, and different settings?
Yeah, that's where it gets trickier. These tools are trained primarily on English data. If we look at the more popular models, so the ChatGPT's, Claude, now there are emerging models coming out that are trained on specific languages, so those are going to be better. But if we look at the general purpose ones that are name brands right now, they're mostly trained in English. They can do translation. They have had some training on a lot of languages, about 100 different languages, but they are not going to translate them all equally. So it depends on how much has the model seen of that given language. So English, Spanish, French, those they do really well. But if we get into something like Swahili, it might not do as well. And also translations between languages. So if we were going to go between French and Hindi, the model has not seen enough of those translations to really translate well. So we really have limitations when it comes to language. And of course, it doesn't know the idioms. It doesn't know the slang. I've shown the example of, with Portuguese, right? 11 Labs has a European Portuguese feature to speak in European Portuguese, but when you play it, it's Brazilian accent. So there's nuances, again, in these tools, and we learn about these nuances by experimentation.
Okay, so this follows and leads to I think one of the questions that everyone is asking. I think that as leaders, we believe that we should be using a lot of productivity reasons for sure, but then teams and individuals are questioning, how should I use it?
Yeah.
Can I use it?
Yeah.
So these are challenges about the limitations, the barriers that we have, and how far can we go? So what recommendations do you have, and what are limitations that you envision, and how do you believe that organization could adopt it responsibly?
Yeah, a lot in that question right there.
Yes,
so I think,
different dimensions.
We could talk about this forever. The reality is we all need this training, right? We've been given the tools. The beauty of generative AI is I can just go and use it. Anyone can just go and use it, right? But we're using it without knowing exactly what we're doing, which in some cases is great. From an individual level, it's a lot of fun. But if you're at an organizational level, that's when we need to start talking about what does it look like to use this responsibly. As an organization, what are my data privacy policies? What tools are you allowed to use versus not allowed to use, right? And so being clear about that is really important. And then we want to just talk about when are the appropriate times to use them. For example, it is possible right now to put in, you could go to ChatGPT and say, here are all my employees, here are the criteria which they've been evaluated on, rank them in terms of who should get the promotion. You can do that, but should you, right? These are ethical considerations. Another example, I've shown how now virtual avatars are so good, and they have a lot of emotion, and you'll see now in newest models, when they speak, their lips will almost match up. So now in theory, you could create an avatar that delivers messages to people. Should you create one of those that lays people off? No, the answer is no. But these are still ethical questions that should be discussed somewhere inside the organization, because within this experimentation, you will get people taking risks. And you want to be clear about what those boundaries might be. So being clear about what is the sensitive situation where you shouldn't use generative AI. That's a great conversation to have inside your organization.
Yes.
Right?
The question I have building on that is, with whom should you have that conversation? Because I would expect a lot of people would have it with generative AI as well.
Okay, so great question. You could have it with generative AI, but you could also go as a team. So one of the things I find in all of my trainings, it's so interesting. People just want to talk. They just want to talk. And I guarantee you inside your organization, people want to talk. So what does it look like to create that space? As a manager, how do you create that space for people to ask these kind of questions? And it means that leaders need to not be shy about it. They need to be, there's a tendency for leaders to want to know everything first, but you have to show some vulnerability there and say, we're learning this together. And I want to bring you into the conversation, right? And let's talk about when to use it and when not to use it. So yes, leaders can use the training too, but also they can step in and be those facilitators as well.
Okay, so final comment. So I think that at Porto Business School, we aim to be an AI-first business school. And of course, we want to promote our leaders to responsibly use AI wherever it makes sense to use them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you have, for our final comments, any recommendations for Porto Business School and leaders within the organizations for the future?
Yeah, we're already starting, having done trainings on this and talking about it with students and really kind of facilitating that conversation. You'll notice that's a theme, right? Facilitate the conversation around it. The other thing too is getting curious about what's out there. We know about ChatGPT. We're using ChatGPT. Okay, what else? There's powerful products out there where you can have at the tip of your fingers, you can query a bunch of articles about all your competitors and have a nice little summary about your competitors right there. That's a powerful tool. What other tools exist in your industry, right? So really getting curious about those tools and thinking, okay, how does this transform my organization? What benefit would this have for my organization if we were to use something like that? And so thinking through not just what can the tool do, but what is the transformative piece of it? Because that's what we're talking about here. It's not just a tool that you use, it's shifting how we work. And so as a leader, you have to really look through that lens. How does it shift how we work, and how does that support our business goals? So, and you're on track here, the conversations we've had with Porto Business School.
Yeah, I think that's one key message for the audience, and thank you, Nicolle, for joining us and sharing your insights, and for the audience to being with us today. And I think that's one of the clear messages that we get today is reserve the time to be curious, reserve the time to explore more, and there are no right or wrong answers. They change very fast, but we need to reserve the time to actually keep connected with the world and understanding how does it should translate in better business decisions. That's what we do at Porto Business School. That's what we've been doing. Nicolle is a faculty now in our programs. We have different programs with AI focused, and we have been the first school, business school, that incorporated AI within all the programs and making sure that we have it in the different courses that we teach at Porto Business School. Thank you a lot for following PBS Pulse, and thank you again, and see you again very soon. Thank you, Nicolle.
Thank you so much.